Hello, everyone. My name is Gian-Carlo Carra. I am the City Councilor for Ward 9 and a candidate for re-election in the October 18 municipal election this year. It's going to be a very significant moment in our city's history. We are sort of heading towards a historic crossroads. And as my team and I discussed the work that I've done over the last 11 years and the conversations we need to have to inform how we want to move forward into the future, conversations with Carra emerged as a vehicle for having really important conversations about our best future. And so this is the third conversation with Carra. I want to thank everyone for joining us out there in cyberspace and everyone who's tuning in later as these get packaged as sort of podcasts. And I want to welcome our two amazing guests for today's conversation about recreation, such an important part of Calgary's character. We're joined by Grace Dafoe, who is a Canadian national team Canadian national skeleton team member, sort of a ambassador for sport and an avatar of Calgary as a center for winter sports excellence. And then we're also joined by a corporate lawyer in town, a gentleman named James Kiozumi, who is also the president of the Calgary Disc Golf Association and is, an incredible fanatic about the sport and an incredible organizer as this sport grows. It's the fastest growing sport in North America and has seen incredible gains in Calgary, across North America. And the statistic that really sort of sits out for me is that the pandemic has driven a lot of people outside, a lot of people outside with their families and with their friends to actually continue to hang out together. And we've seen the increase in women participation in disc golf over the course of the pandemic as the sport has grow from, I heard, 4% to 30%, which is a really exciting statistic. Anyway, I'm going to first off turn to Grace, who not only is a national team member, but is a great community leader in town. She's an ambassador for Kids Sport Calgary chapter. Grace, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself in the context of what does recreation mean to you? And that's a hard thing to ask, sort of like an elite world-class athlete. How do you recreate?
Yeah, thank you. Everyone always, I don't know why people I know why, because I was a kid growing up, why we put athletes on pedestals. But to be honest, I grew up figure skating in Calgary, was pretty, just community club level, skating at one of the city rinks down off Heritage Drive, and somehow stumbled into skeleton in my later years and as an adult. And it's kind of basically, so many things were against me. I've ended up on the national team. That's besides the point. So when you say I'm a world-class athlete, I've spent tons of years just, playing sports of all different levels, skiing in the mountains out here, just outside the city, all that kind of stuff. So, sport and recreation is just literally meant everything to me. Most of my network of friends is either from figure skating, from my past sport, or from skeleton right now. It's giving me incredible opportunities, like working with kids sport, fast and female. My job where I worked for Costume Champions, which is a nonprofit, I also got started as an athlete intern. So to encompass it all, sport and recreation means everything to me. I still like walking through my community at night, walking my dog. So the green space is really how I spend my time outside of my sport, enjoying our city.
Awesome. James, you and I are both 30-year Calgarians. I think we arrived at the city at the exact same time, like so many other Calgarians. Tell us about your journey and what recreation means to you.
You know what? I think recreation, just to add to what Grace said, recreation is at its foundations just about having fun. It's what we do with our spare time. When we have jobs and busy lives, what do we do to have fun? And as a part of that, then when we're having fun, recreation is about being active. We want to stay healthy. We want to get some exercise. So that's the kind of the first two components I think people think about. But I really think that during COVID, it really highlighted one of the most important pieces of recreation, which is sort of our psychological or our emotional well-being. and recreation has meant a ton to me and a lot of the people that we know during COVID, being isolated, not having the typical social outlets. It's been a lot of people's, oasis in terms of keeping sane, working at home in walled rooms and with no light, or being around family all the time. Sometimes it's just nice to have an escape. And I would say that recreation and the journey for me, particularly around COVID, and I know what Grace said, is because of disc golf being something that was COVID safe for most of the pandemic. I've never seen my social network grow in this kind of rate really ever, maybe since the university days. And I think that speaks a lot to just having people wanting to get out, sharing those moments together, but also to the strength of the community. I've participated in, I think, almost every recreational activity. Let's go with at least 80% of the ones that are out there. And the disc golf community has been absolutely incredible. So if you're asking what recreation means to me and the journey around it, particularly during the pandemic, GC, I would say that it's been there's no way to calculate it. I've been smiling and happy throughout, and quite frankly, have been able to sort of avoid some of the very difficult times that I know that many have gone through during this very difficult pandemic.
So I'm going to nerd out a little bit. My first training was as a historian. So my career was sort of like historian, urbanist, now politician. And as I look backwards, when I was doing my history training, it was really about the history of urbanization in North America. And as Western societies industrialized and people moved into the city from the country in unprecedented numbers to work in the factories that were driving the economy, life got dark. The industrial factories were grim places. There wasn't a lot of safety. There was no 8-hour work week. There was no protocols for safety and stuff like that. And recreation was a Western movement to sort of combat the darkness of the industrialized city, the life-sucking nature of the industrial city. And the word recreate really literally means to recreate yourself. And so and everything you talked about in terms of your experience with recreation through COVID is exactly where the word recreation came from, because people were working like 12-hour factory shifts and, not getting great nutrition and not getting, it wasn't a very sanitary environment, and there was no operational safety protocols in place. And there was a realization that if we were not going to grind ourselves to death in these factories, we needed to have time, and we needed to have time to ourselves and time in leafy green environments to get away from the smoke. And that's we've sort of had an echo of that experience through COVID. But I also want to note that, Calgarians, in my mind, are incredible recreators. Like I lived in New York City before I moved here 30 years ago. And I always looked to Calgary, where I spent my summers, as this sort of like recreational sort of mecca, where there was always playing fields, and there was always incredible paths and parkways, and there was the mountains outside our door. Talk to me, I know you're both travelers because what, James is a traveler, and you, of course, as a national team athlete, are traveling all over the world. Where does Calgary's sort of character as a recreational community come from? Is that a real thing? Are we actually recreation forward, like we think about ourselves compared to other places? What are your impressions, Grace?
I mean, my impression is that we're doing okay. I think there's a lot of stuff we can improve, but we're actually pretty unique. So in a sense of winter sports, I've been to almost every place that's hosted a Winter Olympics since bobsleigh has been in it, which is going way, way, way back, because that's where all the tracks still are. Unfortunately, our track was decommissioned here, so I spent 100 days away last season. So I've been to a lot of winter cities. One thing that makes Calgary really unique is that our sports hub is less than 20 minutes away from the airport, directly in a city. Most of the winter sports hubs I visit, You land in an airport, hop in your rental car, you have to drive 2, 4, 5, 6 hours to get to where you're going. So one thing that makes us really unique is that. In terms of like green space and pathways, I mean, I think we also have a large amount of green space for the amount of population we have, based on, I mean, I've lived in every quadrant of the city, so I've kind of had a few different experiences, but I mean, I'd like to give us a rating, I think, a 7 out of 10. There's still lots of stuff to improve, but I think we have a lot of really unique features that makes Calgary stand out.
We're gonna get into how to get those extra 3 points out of 10, and I'm very interested in that, I think, later in this chat. But I'm gonna throw that question over to you, James. Like, when you've traveled to 60 countries and counting, I understand. Where do Calgarians sit on the recreational spectrum?
Well, GC, this might hit home for you. So think about your response from, where you grew up. But I'm going to say 2 things that characterize Calgary for me in terms of recreation come up. The first thing is, and Grace touched on it, blessed. I feel like as Calgarians, we're blessed with a lot of green space, with the mountains nearby, even things like having the Chinooks every once in a while to break up the winter weather. Calgary's quite blessed. Lots of parks. And you know what? At certain points in time, yeah, maybe our facilities, maybe there's not enough hockey arenas in a growing community, but that catches up over time, things like that. But generally speaking, we're quite blessed with the resources we have. But I think, GC, part of that too is now hitting home from, where you grew up. I think we have to improve our resourcefulness. There's a lot of other countries, cities, places that may not have the amount of amenities or space that we have, but they feel like they do a lot more in terms of getting the most out of either those spaces or those amenities or being creative. And if you're talking about recreation as sort of a recreate, I think maybe that's the foundation of where we got to get going as Calgarians, is find a way to recreate, reinvent, and really get resourceful. I think part of the Calgarian spirit is to be resourceful. We go through a lot of tough times, certain times, and we find ways to endure. And I think if we can bring some of that resourcefulness to our recreation, not only our spaces, our activities, things like that, I think the combination of being blessed with a lot of things added to that resourcefulness will put us, in the top of certainly the Canadian standings, but as well as the global standings. But I'll let you comment on that because, hey, coming from New York, I'm sure that concept hits home.
Well, again, I appreciate that. A couple of statistics. We do have the largest municipal pathway system in the world as the city of Calgary, where you can, in a very short distance from any door in the city, get onto a pathway system, and that pathway system will take you literally hundreds and hundreds of kilometers through green space. It is an amazing amenity that we have, and that green space, of course, links together all kinds of different recreational opportunities, on top of being a recreational opportunity in and of itself. The other statistic that I think is interesting about Calgary is 2 years ago, an institute in London just awarded the city of Calgary, out of a 100 cities survey, the best city in the world to be a driver. And that sort of gets a little bit to Grace's point that we're only 20 minutes from our winter sports hub from the airport. We have done an amazingly good job of providing for automobility in the city of Calgary. Now, what makes that statistic interesting is that anywhere else you go in North America and you have the degree of automobility that the city of Calgary has, you also have a much lower participation in active lifestyles. You have a much higher incidence of, sorry, that is something I have to make sure never happens again. My phone is linked up to that. Anyway, you have a much higher incidence of obesity, of heart disease, of diabetes, of these sort of these vectors associated with not moving. And Calgarians, while we drive more than anyone else, we also move way more than we should as a population that drives that much statistically. And so it's one of the places where we're an outlier. Having said all of that, I think for the last several decades, we've sort of rested on our laurels, and we have not reinvested at the rate that we need to keep even with where we've been, and certainly not at the rate to move ourselves forward. And I think that this is a great segue. I'd like to talk to you guys about your specific recreational opportunities, because I don't think we've gotten into that the way we should in a conversation. And so, Grace, why don't you tell us about sliding sports in the city of Calgary? It's amazing history, but also the challenges we have, because as you said, we have decommissioned our training facility at Canada Olympic Park, and that to me is a nightmare. Can you talk to us a little bit about sliding sports, skeleton, where we've come from and where we're at?
Yeah, of course. So skeleton, obviously we built the track for the 1988 Winter Olympics. Skeleton wasn't in the Winter Olympics actually then, but bobsleigh and luge were. Luckily, we used the same facility and the same start as the bobsleigh. So when skeleton athletes have been practicing on it since it was built, I believe in 1987. Fun fact, Cool Runnings is filmed there as well. So if you watch the Cool Runnings, you'll see lots of the shots, unlike Eddie the Eagle movie, which what happened in Calgary, but then they filmed in Austria. Cool Runnings was filmed right here in Calgary. I found skeleton because like I said, I was a figure skater. My figure skating club moved up to the new arenas that opened up at Winsport in around 2010. And growing up in the far southeast in the suburbs, I was like, wow, I have not been to Winsport unless we're heading out of the city to go camping, basically. So going up to Winsport, and I'm looking around, and I knew at that point that I wasn't really going to be an Olympic figure skater, but I still really loved it. I kept it through right till I was 18. And I kind of looked around Canada Olympic Park, and I was like, I wonder what else I could do, like in terms of sports you start as an adult. And, my brain started to turn. Vancouver 2010 Olympics were happening. So I was kind of feeling like I wanted to find something else. So I entertained speed skating, and I ended up looking up the hill and basically going like, whoa, what's that? And so I reached out to the Alberta Skeleton Association in, I believe, late 2011, early 2012. And I got a chance to try it from a lower down start. We ran public programs all the way through until the track closed in early 2018 now. Feels like a lifetime since it's happened, but before that, I was going to university here in Calgary at Mount Royal, and so I would go to school during the day, I'd work up at the gym at Winsport, and then I'd go to my sliding session at night. So to me, having the facility right here in Calgary was like a dream. I could work, go to school, and I could start the pursuit of my Olympic dream in skeleton. So what we're up against now is I've been involved with the Alberta Skeleton Association just up until this year as the athlete rep on the board. Is getting the next generation involved is really hard. The only track we have left in Canada is in Whistler. Whistler's incredibly expensive to live in. I spent close to 60 days there last year, while also paying all my expenses to have a home here in Calgary. I also on top of that had to then rent out a place in Whistler. So my money is, all our national team and anyone who wants to try it at the recreational level, our money is leaving the city now and going out to Whistler to spend there versus, buying food here, gas, etc. It's been a challenge to get the next generation involved. We have a very small group that, Alberta Skeleton has been nurturing to kind of, they're how you make it to the national team. You don't just show up and make the national team. You have to develop your sliding skill through that. So it's been a challenge since the track was closed, just because I've committed to my home being here in Calgary, but having to spend a large amount of time away, as well as, like I said, additional expenses that is outside of our province. But just speaking to that, as well as that before the Calgary track closed, we had a large amount of international sliders that had moved to Calgary, half the year to train and spend time up at Winsport, and they would be in our sliding sessions with the Alberta Skeleton Association. And they've actually chose to stay here and end up getting their permanent residency or meeting someone and getting married and all this stuff. So we actually have a large amount of international sliders, similar to the speed skating world. The Oval was the place to be. Calgary was the track to come to, and they were accept any international athlete with open arms to train here. So it's disappointing that it's closed because we kind of didn't take care of that legacy, and now it's hard to come back from that. So it's been a challenge for sure, just personally, having to spend so much time away from home. But it hurts to see the next generation and the public not be able to, experience the sport that I do. We're one of 2 places in Canada and one of 4 places in North America that had a track. And so we did have this incredibly special thing, and we let it go.
So, yeah, I mean, we got to talk about that a little bit. I want to sort of bring James into the conversation, but I also just do want to ask you about, the Olympics and the bid to host the Olympics in 2026, was our chance to re-up on the amazing legacy of the '88 Olympics that really put Calgary on the map as a center for winter sports. And I'll also, just opine that there probably has never been a more successful winter sports legacy than the '88 Olympics, because, we did become a center for excellence. We did put all of the Canadian athletes on the podium, but we also put people who ran ice rinks and sliding centers and built, half pipes and everything into centers around the world. I mean, there was some amazing statistics from Pyeongchang about how many of the successful athletes, not just the Canadian team, but internationally, had come through Calgary, and how all of the facilities were run with people who had their training and their capacity built in the Calgary environment. So is there a plan within the sliding world to bring that sliding track back, or is it gone?
I mean, it's out of our hands. Alberta Skeleton is purely volunteer run. Bobsleigh Canada Skeleton has their hands full with the athletes. They're pretty small staff themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Really, it relies on, federal, provincial, and city. And if you all can get together and make a plan with, whatever Sport Canada and Heritage Canada to bring it back, that would be amazing. Right now, the plan is that we still have our indoor push track, which is it's called the Ice House. We practice our push starts, which is very important when you're looking for hundreds of seconds down the track. Every 100th of a second counts. So we spend our summers there. So it's great we still have that facility. So right now, how we get athletes into the program is they can push there, but it's really hard to convince, someone who's 17, 18, 19 early up, we're trying to convince them to come into our sport after another sport. And we're like, hey, why don't you spend, $500 to do a camp out in Whistler, plus you have to pay for your accommodations, plus you have to get out there. So it's also a harrowing drive if you don't have a reliable car. And I can think back to the car that I had, when you're growing up and you're like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to make it the 10-hour drive to Whistler. So, I mean, the Olympic bid was an interesting debate, and I think it really brought sport and recreation to the forefront in Calgary. And to me, a lot of cards were shown on how much we actually truly value it, and you saw the people that were firmly with it or firmly not. There wasn't a lot of people in between. I'm not sure a lot of people know that the speed skating oval actually had a similar mechanical failure to the track just last fall, and it was closed for most of the year. So the speed skaters were actually also out of their facility, but they somehow managed to find the funding. I'm sure it's a little bit less expensive to fix, and their track just got up and running. But these facilities are starting to fail us. These athletes, I mean, just touching one of the biggest things that bothered me during the 2026 Olympic, whether we were going to bid or not, was how many people were putting down athletes. And I don't think people realize that athletes are people in our community too. Someone told me that I don't deserve to vote in it because I wasn't a taxpayer. And I was like, I'm not sure where you get this thing about athletes and how we're not taxpayers, we're not people, but we're people. A lot of us live in the city. A lot of people actually aren't, fully sponsored pro athletes. A lot of my teammates have full-time jobs. We all work in the community. You can go to any business in Calgary, and I think there's at least one degree of separation of someone who either knows someone who's involved in high performance sport or has a high performance athlete in their family. Like Calgary's just such a sport community, sport and recreation community. So what really bothered me is people were like saying, why invest in athletes? What do they do for us? And I look around at my team and at all of us who train up at WinSport, and you're like, I can see what we're all doing in the community off the side of our desks between training 20 hours a week and also sometimes working. So, I mean, it'll be interesting with the Olympic bid. Vancouver's considering bidding for 2030 right now, and I'm really keenly tuned into that process just to see how that goes and compare it to Calgary's 2026.
Well, I'll tell you, I was horrified how the kind of vitriol that's usually reserved only for politicians sort of was spread out into our athlete community during that, and I'm sorry that affected you. There's a lot to discuss there, but I do want to bring James into the conversation, and really I think a great sort of starting point is to juxtapose the costs associated with maintaining some of these really infrastructure intensive winter sports versus the unbelievably cost effectiveness of disc golf. Why don't you tell us a little bit about disc golf, James, and sort of like lay out where has this sport come from and what's it about, and how come so many Calgarians are participating in record numbers?
Yeah, there's a lot to do that, but I mean, just to pick up on your last point, whether disc golf is cost effective and accessible, or we have a lot of specialized, winter facilities. Let's face it, we need them all. We need the diversity in our recreation. Heck, Calgary, it seems like, is a winter city for 8 months of the year. So of course we need a lot of these specialized activities during the winter. Just in terms of disc golf, think of it more as maybe less ultimate and more about golf. And golf in Calgary, golf around the world, golf around North America, has been crazy. Think about this year just as a regular golfer, you can't get a tee time these days. And Calgary is blessed with an area of a number of ball golf courses or traditional golf courses. So our city is already passionate about that form of the sport. Where disc golf sort of fills in and takes over is, we sort of market it as a game or a sport or recreation for all ages, wages, stages. And, you can talk about different factors, I guess, all seasons in some respects. So in terms of all ages, if you're a child that's able to throw your dish off of your table because you're not happy with your vegetables, that dish or that plate is similar to the dish that you're going to be throwing. We have some of our oldest ambassadors in our community that are out teaching clinics are still playing 1-2 rounds 4 to 5 times a week. Gentleman is that I know of for sure, 78 years old. There's also 78. And also too, there's people on YouTube in their 80s plus playing quite well. And so it's a way that they're getting out, being active and doing, quite an intense recreational activity that could be turned competitive, but it's very impressive. So that's the ages. In terms of, things like wages and stages, you're talking about, especially in this time, with economic cycles, highs and lows, where people are maybe in and out of jobs or employment or things like that. Disc golf, because we're very fortunate that our courses around Calgary are provided to us as free amenities within our parks. And there are some that are small minor fees, maybe $5, maybe at most $10, and that's usually sometimes on a donation basis. The cost of a disc is now between, say, $15 and let's say $20. That's a one-time fee until you lose it in a tree or throw it into the river. So you can play for probably what amounts to less than your bus fare for the entire month or whatever, as unlimited as you want for the entire year. And so that's where disc golf has been super appealing, to get outside and get some activity on any given day. In fact, sometimes even although the weather's not that great and windy, that adds an extra degree of difficulty. So you're talking about that. And then in terms of all weather conditions, aside from the wind and the rain and things like that, it's all seasons. So I know it's going to be really hard to believe, because Grace has been out there probably freezing in the ice house when the ice house is probably feeling cold. But we've had disc golfers out there shoveling the tee pads in the middle of the winter. I'm a part of chat groups where people are playing every single day. So even the coldest days, you go out there with your gloves, you go out there with your snow boots, you're tossing your disc around. It's just getting out there, getting activities. And then in terms of stages, one of the great things for families and parents is the commitment for regular golf is difficult. I mean, a round is 4.5 hours. which is a lot of time out of people's days when you think about when you get busy. But then you add the extra half hour to get there or warm up, and maybe the half hour to get back. And you're talking about a 5 or 6 hour commitment in a day, which is pretty tough for a lot of people. Not to mention too, with regular golf, you're booking a tee time that, hey, you're pushed between getting from place A and B, or you have a work deadline to meet, you might not be able to meet it. What disc golf is, there's no tee time booking. You just show up when you can, and the round usually takes for 18 holes no more than half, but certainly about a third of the time that a regular round of ball golf does. So it's very convenient. You can play 2 rounds for sure in the time that you could play a round of ball golf. So I think that's where the appeal has been. And as a result, well, and then from a municipality parks and recreation perspective, it uses a fraction of the amount of space. So you're looking anywhere from, say, for a full course, I would say at the small end about 8 or 9 acres, to the large end at about 12 to 14 acres for a really nice 18-hole facility for disc golf. And then obviously the professional layouts would probably be in around sort of maybe that 18-acre a mark. But from a land use perspective, still a lot less than a traditional ball golf course. So all of those factors combined, aside then from disc golf being fairly, safe from a social distancing perspective. So we've seen the growth in the sport has been incredible, as you can imagine. I believe the statistic is they anticipate in the United States that there'll be more disc golf courses in the next 8 years than ball golf courses. Disc golf will outpace that. In terms of in Canada, our Baker Park, the one near Bowness, just north of the river.
This is a good story, Grace.
Yeah. We have the official statistics keeper for disc golf is an app called UDisc. And they tracked it. They sent us the information. They actually reached out to us. They're like, what's going on in Calgary? I'm like, what are you guys talking about? And we got on the phone with them and they said, well, did you guys know statistically Baker Park is the #1 most popular or most played course in Canada? And we're like, wow, that's insane. And then they said, well, what's actually crazier is you're actually #4 in North America.
And that's competing against sun states that don't have winter and stuff like that.
Yeah, we only play 8 or 9 full months of the year before snow really kicks in, and we still ranked #4, and that was behind San Francisco, a course in San Francisco, a course in Dallas, and a course in San Diego. So we're outpacing the U.S. that's had that more, and then we're actually 16th in the world. So we made the world charts. Not to mention too, Gian-Carlo, Calgary's positioning itself as the #1 disc golf destination in Calgary,
in
Canada. And I will add to that and just kind of, drop a little bit of a news bit for you is that we are about to announce 4 new disc golf course locations here in the city. And that now puts us, from a municipality perspective, leaps and bounds on a per capita basis for anywhere else in Canada. So I think it feeds to a couple of things. One, and I should actually note too, by the way, you're having your Stampede fundraiser this Sunday, a little plug for you there.
There it is on the screen.
And you know what, and just so you know too, and the listeners, Elliston's a very key place to have disc golf. We're talking about a region in the Southeast that probably needs some more recreational amenities. We're very blessed in some of the things we have in the Northwest and Southwest, including, our facilities at Winsport. But not to mention too, that we have to be mindful of sort of the, I guess, nearby tourism where that would service the whole town of Chestermere as a location. So again, disc golf being something that can be integrated in multi-use areas. It doesn't need its own thing. So there's with dog parks or with other sort of recreational tennis courts and things like that. I think that's where disc golf has found its niche. And, it goes to that community that we're serving, that we're working with. It extends from the '88 Olympics. I mean, one of the things we talk about is the community spirit that came from the '88 Olympics, the volunteerism. Well, I can tell you that disc golf heavily relies on volunteer spirit and the sense of community, and that's come from things like having the '88 Olympics. So that's how all of our recreational activities work together. Certainly if Calgary is successful in our next Olympic bid, of course we'll be investing in some of the major infrastructure there, but it's all those people, all of us as Calgarians coming together and how that filters off into other recreational activities, including our own community of disc golf.
I think that there's a number of things I want to touch on. I appreciate you doing the shout out for the disc golf fundraiser at Elliston Park. I can tell you that the Parks Department is looking closely at how we're setting up a temporary 18-hole course there. And the Parks Department's looking at it because, as you say, it's a great location for spreading out the sport, and they're very interested to see how the temporary course works. I will I want to take a little bit of a bow because Baker Park I had a very active role in getting Baker Park built. There was a disc golf course on St. Patrick's Island, and when the Calgary Municipal Land Corporation rebuilt St. Patrick's Island as the beautiful park space that it is today, as sort of the backyard for the growing neighborhoods of Bridgeland and Inglewood and the East Village, there was a debate about whether disc golf could stay. And when I was convinced as the city councilor that it was going to be too busy a park to include disc golf, I switched my tactic and I negotiated walking away money. And the historic use of disc golf, people played Baker Park very informally way back in the day, and we formalized that course, and now it's the busiest course in North America, which is really exciting. But I think the most important thing that you talked about, James, is the idea of volunteerism and how connected that is to the Calgary experience of recreation. I will note, I dropped the statistic that Calgarians are way more active than we should be, given how much auto dependency we have as a city. We also punch above our weight in volunteerism. There are statistics that track the amount of civic engagement, civic participation, volunteerism, and there's a direct correlation between how much time you spend in your car and how little time you have left to volunteer. And Calgarians are volunteers way above where we should be, given those statistics. And so you talked a lot, Grace, about how the skeleton team, the sliders, this is largely a volunteer run organization, and your ability to sort of take that work and try and advocate for keeping the sliding track open is tough. Talk to me about volunteerism from your perspective and the critical role it played in running the Olympics, in our Olympic legacy, and in the ongoing legacy of volunteerism and recreation in Calgary. What are your thoughts, Grace?
I mean, so I wasn't around in 1988, but I've heard many stories from the sport community about how it inspired them to volunteer. Many of our officials who helped run our races up at Canada Olympic Park prior to the track closing were trained, maybe from that era, or were kids of officials, from that era. So like I said, our sport is very largely volunteer run, but it's the officials that run all the sports, the people who sit on all the sport organizations throughout Calgary and area. A lot of them are volunteer run. For me, my mom was on my figure skating board, I would say, for about 10 years because she got roped in because they needed a person, and she ended up staying for 10 years and becoming the president of it. And again, that's a role she never really thought she'd see herself in. But to me, parents in sport are largely driving this, extending obviously far into, I'm in my late 20s now, and my mom is still on the Alberta Skeleton Board now. So, I mean, it was largely driven by seeing both my parents volunteer for sport. We grew up in a new community. We moved to Sundance when I was just born, and there wasn't a lot of, recreation space out there at that time. And so my dad was a large driver with the Hockey Association to get that Fish Creek Arena built and that. So to me, it just I think I just grew up looking around saying that's what you do. And then when I started to train seriously for skeleton, I was around at this gym previously where I was, and of athletes of all, rugby players, national level rugby players, international level other athletes. And they were also volunteering for kids sport. And that's actually how I ended up being a kids sport ambassador. Is I looked around, I'm like, well, all my friends are volunteering and going to these events for Kids Sport Calgary and raising money. As an athlete, I guess that's what you do. And so to me, it seemed natural. And so that's how I ended up, going there. And then another organization asked, Fast and Female, which advocates for female participation in sport. I'm like, well, yeah, obviously that's something I also care strongly about. So, I mean, it's kind of dominoes of, well, okay, I also care about this. And now I've had to be a little choosy because I've taken on a lot of volunteer roles. But to me, I just think that I obviously, growing up after the games, like in the 90s, it was like, that's just what sport was here. And we didn't know otherwise. And I think that a lot of it, like I said, is parents and families with their kids in sports that care about them, and they're advocating so that their kids can continue to play.
Awesome. This is a good time to start talking about what we need to do moving forward. I'm a big believer that we are at a critical moment in our city's history. Like, I think that this election, historians will look back at this moment in time and say that is the point in time where Calgary started to fade into irrelevance, started to become like the Detroits and the Buffaloes and maybe even the Winnipegs of this world. Their core industry was over, and their lights started to dim. Or alternately, it's the point in time we'll look back and say this is where Calgary pivoted on its strengths and rose as a great Western Canadian place to make a great Canadian life. I believe recreation will play a huge part in that sort of that need to double down and triple down on our strengths and rise. What do we need to do from a recreation perspective moving forward? Like, both with your specific sports in mind, but also with the broader recreational agenda to sort of keep us, as Calgarians, focused on these amazing recreational opportunities we have within the city and regionally. You want to jump on that first, James?
That's a great question. Hey, you're in conversations that Grace and I will never be in terms of that. But I would just say generally, when you're thinking about different strategies like that, is, I really think we have to establish our peer group outside of, for example, what's provincially or what's even nationally. And if we really want to truly be a leader, let's set our sights on what's happening internationally, and let's position our strengths around that. So, for example, we are blessed with a ton of space, a ton of great amenities, like you said, the driving statistic as well, the pathways and things like that. Okay, so we're blessed with a lot of resources. Just like, for example, he's a historian, so is Alberta. Alberta's been blessed with a lot of natural resources. We're blessed with a lot of recreational resources. Now, let's talk about how we leverage and manage those. I think taking it back to our sport, disc golf, and other ones, understand that this year, I think when the statistics come in, disc golf will be responsible for over 1 million recreational hours in the city of Calgary. And so when you think about that, think of all the benefit that's providing people. It's getting them outside of their cars. It's getting them active. It's getting them social. It's helping our mental welfare. So to make Calgary a great city, as recreation being a part of that, for me, I feel like, okay, we have to understand that people are coming to the city now more than just for industry. And you're right, the timing of this election is perfect. We're coming out of a little bit of an economic cycle where we're finally having a chance to, as you said, recreate, which is the foundation of the word recreation. Not to mention, too, this election's timed perfectly because we're coming out of COVID, which is another sort of regime where it's an opportunity to sort of have this metamorphosis or this recreation at this point in time. And understanding that people are coming now to Calgary as a full, holistic, quality of life place to live, not just an industrial place to make a career, make a lot of money in advance, but they're looking for the whole package. So great place to work in diverse industries, but also they're looking for places to raise their families, great places to have recreation, have nature, and so on and so forth. So recreation has to be a key cornerstone of that piece to just leverage the city as a wonderful, great place to live. Before, it might have just been packaged as come to Calgary, they pay a lot of money, they've got a lot of industries, advance your career. Now it's come to Calgary for the best package and offering of lifestyle possible that we can offer, certainly in this country, but again, competing on an international level.
I love a lot of what you're saying there, James. I'll throw in some stats. I was elected in 2010 alongside Mayor Nenshi, which was a real turning point in our city's history. And one of the turning points it represented was that we've always prided ourselves in Calgary being a great place to make a living, a great place to make a life. And those two ideas have sort of sat at the center of our citizen satisfaction survey, which has gone on for years and years and years. And it was in 2010, 2011, 2012 that Calgary is a great place to make a life, for the first time ever, exceeded great place to make a living. And so I think everything that you're talking about is exactly right. And I love your idea of benchmarking ourselves against other places, so we are really sort of competitive internationally. I'll ask the same question to you, Grace. What do we need to really focus on moving forward, if you agree with the entire thesis that we're at a critical moment in our city's history?
Yeah, I mean, we are. And I think I have this hopeful feeling that Calgary's on the verge of something, of our like new rebirth, I guess, in the sense of moving forward. I don't know. I just get this feeling that the feeling in this city is really good right now. There's a lot of businesses starting up. So, I mean, I would turn my eyes to something really great that came out of the failed 2026 Olympic conversation, and that's the Active City Collective. And I, for those that aren't familiar, you can look it up, but it's all based on the active economy. And it's exactly what we're talking about today. Anyone who in any capacity participates in any sport or recreation, whether it even be as a fan, in business, or doing it yourself, you're a part of the active economy. And I think this is our niche. You got me so excited, James, talking about the Baker Park and like disc golf. Like, I want to go out and play disc golf.
We're taking you out to play with us, Grace.
We're taking you out right after this.
So, like, to me, what really this word that stands out is niche, and how can we differentiate ourselves? And the Active City Collective has been thinking about this. And another thing that really well that we've started to do, I believe it's Calgary Economic Development has been doing this, but when COVID hit, you know, they started calling around to all the national sport organizations. Okay, who wants to host a bubble here in Calgary? And that's how we ended up with the curling bubble. Is they're trying to attract people to stay in the hotels, be fed in their hotel rooms, and and use the recreation facilities while most people couldn't, so they really just made those calls and tried to bring what we call like active tourism or the active economy to our city. And I really think that this is our niche of how we can differentiate ourselves is, why don't we host an international disc golf tournament here and have people come all over and host it here? And I don't know, that's where I see Calgary going in this perspective. One thing that is at the top of my list that, I said 7 out of 10, what could bump us up? We do live in a winter city, and I have also spent many times shoveling out at all the city tracks and Calgary Rotary Track way up north to train all through the winter is a field house. That is one thing that Calgary is missing. I know it's been on our list for like 30 years, but that is one thing that I know we're really missing. Anyways, that's kind of where I'm at, but you should check out the Active City Collective and we can start talking about the active economy. That's where I really think we can move forward.
Well, I mean, a lot of things to say there. I will say that, as we talk about oil and gas no longer being the central driver of our economy, Calgary Economic Development has sort of developed a 7-point sort of diversification strategy that really builds on our strengths. And one of those, of course, is the tourism, the active tourism, the sports tourism economy, which is one of those 7 pillars. And it's a huge part of who we are. And I think that our conversation today has really talked about that. In the first part of our term, we began the project, and since 2010, we began the project of reinvesting in recreational facilities. And we built, we built 4 major facilities: the 2 YMCA's in the north and the south, great, amazing buildings. We built ice rinks in Ward 9 in the industrial southeast near the Ring Road, and we built the Quarry Park YMCA. But we just announced another tranche of significant reinvestment in recreational facilities. One of those things is turning the Repsol Center from not just a high performance sports facility, but also a family leisure center in the heart of the inner city. We're bringing 2 more field houses into play, and we have the money secured for that mega sort of sports tourism field house at the Foothills Center. I believe that we need to double down on our strengths. I spent some time in Chicago where my brother lives, and they pay property tax wise twice as much per house, per capita per house in property tax. But what they get is, their lakeshore has beaches that are always staffed with lifeguards. Every community in Chicago has a recreation facility in their regional community park that's free. And there's a certain quality of life there. We have very low taxes here in Calgary, very low, and we provide a very high quality of service. But we're at a moment of generational renewal. I talked to the Parks Department, and I would describe our parks budget as keeping our extensive park system on life support. It's not thriving, it's surviving. And so I'll ask you guys, what do you think the appetite is for Calgarians to, since the downturn, we've been driving the cost of government down. Our taxes are low compared to anywhere else in North America. What do you feel like the appetite is to inflect a little bit and to spend a little bit more money to double and triple down on the strengths that we have? Because that is really sort of the core issue. And I'm boldly saying we need to start spending a little bit more money. How does that strike you as Calgarians? Or is that a path to political suicide, or is that what we need to do right now? I'll ask Grace, as someone who's been accused of not even paying taxes for some.
I know. I mean, they've gone up the same amount that everyone was so scared about when the Olympic bid, and now we're paying for all the stuff that we would have had money coming in from the IOC, etc. Don't get me started. I think it's a balance, and I for sure would love to pay a little. Like I said, they're going up regardless, slightly. They're still pretty low comparatively, and to other cities, but I definitely would. It's a balance. I'd love to have that conversation after this. I think it's a little more than yes or no. I'm open to it for sure, and I think maintenance is a big thing you're saying here, is that we need to maintain it. Otherwise, just like the track, it's going to go away.
DC, maybe just one statement to wrap that up too. Time will tell. But with the coming out of the pandemic and COVID changing the world, I think there's been no better opportunity to make a change like that and rally people behind coming out of this almost pandemic prison, so to speak, and having that regime change. So I think, to your point, maybe the outcome is uncertain, but in terms of the opportunity, I don't think there's been a better time in recent history.
I'll be very frank with you. My platform in this re-election campaign is really calling for a couple of budget line items, so that when you pay your taxes, there is a line item that you understand what percentage of your taxes is going where. And one of those line items, I think, has to be a sort of historic investment in culture and in parks and in recreation, so we can maintain what we have and we can build the new things that we need to build for our future. I was proud to be a member of Calgary City Council in 2012, and 2012 was a historic centennial for many of Calgary's institutions and special buildings, like the library system, the parks department, the recreational department, all of the sandstone buildings that we built. Calgary in 1912 was spending money to not serve the city they were, but to create the city that they wanted to become. And that really sort of gave us a footing for the success we've had since then. I feel like we're at a similar point, but I agree with you that, Calgarians are also very volunteer-oriented, very thrift-oriented. And if you are going to spend money, you have to prove that the value proposition is there, and there has to be, a real appreciation for that. Anyway, I think we're sort of reaching the end of this conversation. Any closing remarks? Thank you so much for I think what's been a really interesting conversation. Grace, anything you want to sort of add as a closing remark?
No, just thank you so much. And this has been a great conversation.
James.
Yeah, GC and Grace, thank you very much. Grace, we'd love to partner with you at Kids Sport as well. We'd love to get you out personally. We want to make women leadership in disc golf a big thing nationally in Canada. And I'd also like to remind everybody for sure that there's the Stampede fundraiser this Sunday. It's meant for families. It's a meant to opportunity to have these conversations with GC. It's not really even about the disc golf. It's about that community. It's about having those conversations, discussing some of these issues. Come out to the event. It's on the Sunday. It's at Alliston Park, a really fantastic recreational space too. So just wanted to, plug that, but let everybody know it's not necessarily about the disc golf. It's really about spending some time together, having these conversations because we can. So that's all I've got, GC.
No, that's great. That's how I was going to close, plugging the event this Sunday, but I really appreciate it. Look, a lot of really interesting insight. Thank you for everything you guys do in and for our community. And I think we've got a lot of interesting things to think about and talk about. But if you think about recreation as recreating yourself, I think that recreation has an opportunity at this moment in history to recreate the Calgary we want to be. And I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you for this last hour about your amazing sports and your contributions to that sport and just recreation in general in Calgary. So thank you so much, both of you. And I don't know if we're going to get onto the skeleton track with you, Grace, but you're definitely getting onto the disc golf course with us.
Sounds good.
Bye, everybody. Thanks so much.